So I think it's probably fair to start with just an admission. I did not like school one bit. So the goal here for me today is to make this most valuable for each of you. I want to cover just some basic details about my background, what we do at Nursa. You can scour the site as I'm doing that. And then I just want to make this a conversation. So I'm curious, I'm just as curious as much about what's engaging or what aspects of business are important to you, what you want to accomplish in your life, and anywhere that I can add value to that, or just speak to personal circumstance I want to do it. I grew up small community in southern Idaho, like 2,000 people at the county fair type small, so just really tiny. There were 52 people in my graduating class, and that might start in high school, but that might start to help you understand the value of why I didn't care for school much. And was really excited. I got my first computer when I was 12, built my first computer when I was 13, was exposed to the internet at age 10, and it was the most magnificent gateway to the outside world. I loved information you could access, the way in which you could solve problems, a machine as an information resource and then as a tool. Was really fascinating. I started building websites at age 14, launched a company in which we built websites for the school district and for city offices and county offices. And then that was very much like internet as a noun. We watched HTML 2.0 come online, graduated high school, did a service mission for my church, and then spent time through college working on noodling on other technology products. Graduated with a business degree and then launched Utah State. Okay. Is where I finished my degree and had transitioned jobs. Actually spent some time working in the film industry through college. More correlation there than initially meets the eye. And then went back into technology. I found a product called Tableau. Tableau is basically fancy pie charts for storytelling and business purposes. It's a really remarkable product, and tore it apart and thought, I think we could do this. Like I could do this for small businesses, and so built a fancy pie chart application for some small businesses, dental and chiropractic. Licensed the software with a company here in Utah called Dentrix, which is a stepchild of a bigger company called Henry Schein. And Henry Schein owns about, they would tell you more than 50% of the dental market uses their software, but closer like 45%. Heavy, they're a heavy hitter. And then had a little bit of cash and decided that I wanted to get closer rather than telling people how to make good decisions. I wanted to actually be making some of those decisions myself. And so started looking. I knew that medical had a breadth of problems to solve, things that we could automate. And so I started looking at businesses to buy, went through the process of purchasing a business. I found a traditional nurse staffing agency that was run by a nurse and her husband. And they had doubled year over year for almost a decade in revenue growth. They had a whiteboard that was about this big and just an endless stack of Post-it notes. And I just thought, if I'm half the technologist that my mother believes I am, we should be able to automate this. So I bought the company, put operators in place, and then started playing with tech. Any piece of software that would help a staffing agency. For the first 7 months of that venture, I basically just did a bunch of research. Two things emerged out of that phase. There's these two types of problems. So number one, there's two types of problems that get solved by the agency. Number one is Nurse Nancy's leaving on maternity leave, and we got to fill her seat for 12 weeks. That's a longer term contract. And a lot of the press and media that you'll read in recent years, that is usually happens from state to state. So you'll solve a Utah problem, a Utah hospital problem with a Connecticut nurse or a Florida nurse or a California nurse. So someone else will come in from out of state. The second problem is Nurse Nancy is sick. I got to solve 12 hours tomorrow. I need a nurse for 12 hours tomorrow. And that shorter term problem is called per diem nurse staffing. And per diem is the ugliest stepchild in the room. It's an incredibly painful problem because staffing agencies are generally run on a service-based model, meaning there is a person solving the problem. And so building a team that can consistently solve problems tomorrow with resources that we have available today is really hard. It's really hard. But there's lots of ways in which technology had improved. Leveraging the internet as a verb or connecting physical and digital components was a really big push. I had had a great experience with literally a Lyft and an Uber ride in like 2011. We can talk about that, but it was magical. I had like in 30 seconds, I had a ride across town. And that was a very literal illustration of the power of leveraging the internet to connect two parties who wanted to transact in some way. And I could never get it off of my mind. And so fast forward, I have this staffing agency. We have problems that we want to solve tomorrow. I have a background in using data and information to drive better business decisions. And it was a pretty grand intersection of all of my experience and what we had the opportunity to build. And so we started building this layer of tech that would connect the nurse and the facility. I used all of my money to build out that layer over a period of about 16 months. And then we started Nursa as a separate company from the agency. And and we listed the app on the App Store. That was in March of 2020. It's hard to remember or think about a world that was pre-COVID. But COVID wasn't a thing then. It was just getting started. And so we launched the app at a just really fortuitous time. And I've been building that team and that product since over the last 3 years. I'll pause here. That's a little bit about background. I'm happy to unpack any piece of that further. But is there any specific questions that come to mind while we do this? Fire at will.
What specifically is like your product?
Yeah, absolutely. So Nursa is an app. You can look it up in the App Store. And the app allows nurses to pick up flexible work, meaning we don't force a schedule on them. They have the ability to choose when they want to work. And on the other side of the marketplace, we have facilities who have staffing needs. So they're short 1 or 2 or 200 nurses tomorrow. And so we help facilitate that. So we charge the business model, we charge the facility what's called a bill rate, and we pay the nurse what's called a pay rate, and then we keep the middle of that. And we do it all with software components to make it stable and standardized. Have I explained that well? Brilliant.
Can they be independent?
They are independent. We look at them as independent workers. I'm assuming you're like a 1099. Is that the basis of the question?
Yeah.
Yeah. So all of the nurses on our platform are independents. That's part of why we don't dictate their schedule.
Does that mean that they would go to several different facilities and clinics and hospitals, like just shuffle around?
Yep. So it's where there's just a jobs feed, just like you'd look at Instagram content or hotel rooms on like an Expedia, or they can see different needs. They can sign up and fill those, and they
so it
usually do.
Work on like a day to 2 week job.
Yeah, we focus really tightly on like a 1 or 2 day window today. And I can speak to that, a little bit of why.
Oh, wow, so they just do 1 to 2 days.
Yep,
Isn't that hard for them to like have to fit in and jump into something that they've never done before constantly?
yeah, it absolutely. So part of the challenge here is in connecting those two parties is making sure that we can facilitate a good transaction, certainly. Two other notes about this and a little bit of contrast. The first note, most clinicians, if you have a full-time job as a nurse, a full-time job in a hospital is 3 12-hour shifts a week. And so you end up in this place where you might have full-time work for the week, you'll have your benefits covered, and you still end up with 3 or 4 days out of the week, depending on
Oh,
where they're just free.
so they filled it with Nursa.
Correct,
Cool. Also,
Correct.
so most of them have a constant job.
correct.
This is their side gig, as they call it these days. We used to
Yeah.
call it moonlighting back in my day, but.
And either works, either works. This is a great question, and I think there's a bit more we can unpack there at length. Go ahead.
Just wondering too, like with that, like clinicians and different like hospitals and different clinics and things like that, how like presenting Nursa to them, how like optimistic are they? Like, are they more like, oh yeah, this is like a great, I don't know, have there been challenges with that, like clinics being like, yeah, this doesn't work for us? And
So this ties into maybe the second note here, and with this, people don't like the unfamiliar, right? There's a lot of fear and anxiety about showing up someplace new. And so there certainly is on the front end for us, there's a white glove catered approach to help people understand that this is okay, to cross the chasm of adoption of a technical product, to say, you can trust us to help you consistently find that work, certainly. And over periods of our growth, we've done that increasingly better, but there's definitely still a long way to go. The beauty for us in this respect is that we're not the first to do this, right? We're not eBay, iTunes, Uber, Airbnb. Like, we can name dozens of products that have gone before us in that respect. And so in a lot of cases, you're certainly helping people get through a wall they've never been through before, but we have the benefit of a lot of internet history to demonstrate that that there are positive outcomes, and that's been incredibly beneficial for us. As what you'll get is that a clinician will say, oh, you're like Amazon, or you're like Airbnb, or you're like Uber, and that softens the blow, and then they go and fill their first couple of shifts. They have a good experience with the building, then it improves the likelihood that they'll repeat. And on the flip side, we talk to the buildings about there's a nurse shortage, right? This is no news, but in that nurse shortage, okay, you've got to think about these people that are coming in a little bit differently. So the buildings will white glove the experience as well. We'll talk to buildings about, you should have a welcome basket, you should have someone meet them at the front door, walk them through the facility before the shift starts, those kinds of things. We even have a group of facilities who have committed to providing like a warm cookie to anyone who comes into the shift. And it's crazy how simple things can improve a customer journey in incredibly delightful ways. Like, we don't make the cookies, right? The buildings themselves raised their hand and said, we'll make the cookies, and it makes a huge difference. But a huge focus for our operations team, certainly.
So some of your customers that are bringing the new nurses in are seeing it as a way of maybe recruiting these nurses for a permanent.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
On the facility side of it, we don't charge any higher away fees. So, and the note there is, who are we to interrupt serendipity, right? If someone is looking for full-time work and wants to use this as like a test drive, well, certainly they should do it on either side of the market. And then our belief, and this is bearing out in data generally, But our belief is that if we make the connection, if we help facilitate a connection for either one of those parties down the road, when another need emerges or exists, they'll come back to us because they had a good experience and we didn't fight them on the solution that they found to fill their need.
So I have like two questions. The first one is, how can you verify that the nurses are actually nurses? And then the other one is that for how many hours or days can you hire a nurse with this app?
Yeah, okay, so the first question, there's a federally funded database of all nurse licensure in every state. And so each state has a nursing board that checks and verifies licenses. They contribute that to a federally funded database, and then we access that database. So on sign up, we will ask for your name, your email, your phone number, and then your license number. And when we get that license number, we run a real-time check against the database to determine if you're a nurse. If you're a nurse, then we run a couple of other identity checks, Social Security, or at least some kind of validation, citizenship validation, and then state level components, and then we show you jobs. We do that process today in about 6 to 16 minutes. It kind of depends on how fast you can click, but in less than 20 minutes. That is an improvement over agency of days. And so you think about the ways in which technology can compress and automate a process like this. That's how we do it today.
Background checks normally take like, 2 to 5 days or more.
They can, and there are certain states where this process, where some of this is happening underneath the surface. There's interesting ways in which you don't have to run a linear process when technology is involved. Meaning, if I know that person's a nurse, while I'm checking to make sure they're not a felon, I can still show them jobs, right? We can still look at that. And so, whereas in an agency environment, you would come in, you would fill out an application, we would run all of the checks, and then we would return to have a conversation with you. That certainly works. But what ended up happening and what has grown to happen is you'll get nurses who submit 100 pages, literally, of documentation, college grades, social security number, driver's license information, everything about their financial history and bank account information, and then the agency would never call them back. And on average, the nurses that I sampled in 2018 to do this, 45% of the time, they weren't hearing back, which meant they were handing over 100 pages of their life story and information to somebody who they would never meet, who they would never hear from again, and who would never open up or give
Why
them a
would
job.
they hurry back with that much information?
Yeah, so what ends up happening is in an agency, you prioritize for guaranteed work. You're incentivized as a recruiter to fill jobs. And so you go after filling the jobs that offer you the most revenue, which is usually tied to the company's revenue. And in doing so, not everyone is a good fit for every job, especially in such a specialized environment. And so you literally will just get recruiters where maybe you have experience in an ICU and this recruiter has no ICU jobs available. And so they don't contact you back.
Wow.
But your second question.
Yeah, it was about how many hours or days can you hire them? For example, I got sick and I needed for a week or 2 weeks.
Yep. So we look at this in very small building blocks. The shortest amount of time that you could hire someone today is an hour. And the longest amount that we've seen on the platform is about 3 months. Okay. But in order to build technology that automates these processes that have historically been very manual, you have to choose very thin slices, like very narrow contextual focus. You've got to be myopic. And we say that we win by winning with the rule of one at a time. So you do one thing perfectly, rule of one at a time. So you do one thing perfectly. In our world, there's a difference between hiring a nurse for 12 hours and for 12 weeks. And what we chose to do is focus exclusively on the 12-hour increment with the expectation that if we get perfect at delivering a nurse to someone overnight and finding that match, that we can go upstream from there much easier than if we started with longer term engagements and came down. Last minute delivery is really, really hard to nail. I mean, there's a reason Toyota is celebrated for the way that they did this in manufacturing and why things like Uber matter in our lives today, because you can get a ride in 10 minutes. And so we felt like the harder problem to solve was to get it done shorter. So that's where we focus, but the platform will allow for longer term engagements as well.
Cool.
Fire will.
All right, so first question, does this count for like travel nurses, things like that? Is it all
Yeah.
like United
Wow.
States?
Yeah. So today we have users on the nurse side in all 50 states, and we are listing jobs in 14 states or 19 markets. And this is where stuff gets really interesting as far as how that works. A state is kind of tough, right? If I had a job, think about for a minute, if I have an emergency room job in Ogden and I have a nurse who wants to fill it tomorrow in St. George, like locality, geography matters in marketplace dynamics. And so we end up hyper-focusing on geos that include city lines, right? So at some point in our system, 5300 South to North Temple will be its own set of geography, because in order to make that match happen, I need someone who's close enough to fill it geographically.
So like a school district?
Yeah. You could design those lines. We look at it today as cities or metro areas, and then depending on the volume that's happening in that metro area, we get tighter and tighter and tighter. We end up actually, it's a process called hex binning. So we take all of our volume and we lay it out on a map, and then we put it inside geometric shapes that work out mathematically to match our market need.
All right, and then next question, with that, like your entire app and like everything about that, is it so that nurses avoid overtime?
Not necessarily. What we're looking for is providing clinicians with the opportunity to have innovation. I mean, really, it's innovation and opportunity at their fingertips. Okay, so there's this really interesting problem where hospitals. Anyone been to a hospital recently? Do you know how much you paid for an aspirin or like any of the medicine?
A lot.
A lot, right? But you don't see it. This is a process that's called information dissymmetry in economics. It means that one party has an upper hand in the transaction over the other party because of the information that they have. Now, hospitals are really great. Healthcare facilities generally, any healthcare facility is generally really good at this because there's an insurance middleman between us and them, okay? This process also affects the way in which they work with their staff. And so you'll get a nurse who doesn't know how to negotiate because they don't understand their own worth in the work that they're doing. I think that's really fascinating. And you'll see a lot of articles right now about nurses unionizing. Okay, this is a method and a way in which historically in our country, you could bring balance to that information dissymmetry calculation. But in the case of nurses, that's not always true. It was always interesting to me to just see how much spread there was between someone who just came out of college, a new grad, and someone that had been at a facility for 10 or 15 years. And there might be a $10 an hour spread between those two people. And you'd be surprised to learn that it's actually in the college graduate's favor, right? The hospitals and administrative teams have done a great job of compressing what the growth curve looks like in rates over the lifetime of a clinician's career. And so for us, this was about providing a very transparent way to make that pay apparent for both parties, but also provide the clinician with the opportunity for flexibility. You might remember a case last year at Vanderbilt where a nurse was charged with the murder of a patient. This is like, think about like the work that you do every day. If you could be held responsible for somebody's life in that setting, you would think a little bit more gingerly about the work that you committed to do or the companies that you committed to be with. And so there's this place in which the job itself is really stressful, right? It's high anxiety, and there's a ton of burnout. But these are good people. Like if any of you have ever met a nurse or a CNA, at some point, like it's not about the money. Like you don't go into that field and stay in that field for 2 decades unless you care about others, about humanity, right? You have to give a crap about people's health and well-being to do this job. And so that gets taken advantage of in a lot of ways in the information dysymmetry. And so for us, the goal of Nursa, the mission of Nursa, is to empower and enrich the lives of clinicians with innovation and opportunity. We want to give them a shot in a number of different ways.
So you take nurses and CNAs or just nurses?
Today, we do nurses and CNAs. There's 2 types of nurses, a practical nurse and a registered nurse, and we work with both in the markets that we're in today. You had a question earlier.
Oh, yeah.
Sorry.
I just wanted to ask do you focus specifically on nurses or is there other positions that, because I know this service could be used for other things.
Yeah.
Substitute teachers.
Absolutely. So there's a company out of South Jordan right now who does substitute teachers, and another one out of Columbus, Ohio. You're right.
Are you related to any of these? Or?
No, other than like we're building on kind of the same or a similar foundation. We're using similar technical components. And so how you might recruit a facility or how you might recruit a nurse, there are similarities in the process between that and a substitute teacher. For us, in this respect, we want to be the best in the world at per diem nurse placement. That's the goal.
So you're focusing solely on.
Yes, but here's the reality, and an illustration that gets overly used, but is absolutely worth sharing. Amazon sold books, and then they sold everything, including space and the internet, right? And some of those layers, their book business, their online retail business wasn't profitable when they started leasing hardware space, right? And AWS, Amazon Web Services, as it's now known, is the biggest money-making aspect of the company. And so today there are certainly things that we are doing as a company that are cost centers for us today that could be profit centers for us in the future if we dial in and are specific about our approach of it. Certainly.
Yes, the question is, how do you make a profit? Is the company or like the hospital has to pay higher than the normal wage for those nurses so then you can get profits, or like even they pay the same wages for those nurses, you will still get the profit?
Yep, and this is a great question. Two or three points here. Number one, we make a profit when a nurse and a facility work together. In most cases, the facility is paying more on an hourly wage than what they would if it was someone full-time in the building. However, that calculation changes over time. Okay, so in healthcare facilities today, we call it a nurse vacancy rate, but there's basically a percentage of the work that is happening in any healthcare facility in the country that is done by someone who is not a W-2 employee of that facility. The nurse vacancy rate is the percentage of people doing work, so the percentage of nurses who are caring for patients that do not work full-time for the facility. In 2017, when I was evaluating and purchased the agency, the average nurse vacancy rate was 14%, meaning out of every 100 employees that were in the building, 14 of them were from an agency or some other solution. They were from outside. Today, the end of 2022, the average was 32%, and we saw as high as 52% in nurse vacancy rate in portions of COVID. So when you start to matriculate that out over time or expand it, up front, you might be paying more for an hourly employee that's coming from outside the building. But what that employee does is provides help for people, other nurses who are full-time who wouldn't have it otherwise. And so what we see over time is that the cost trend comes down. And it's a really short window. At about 10 weeks of using Nursa, we slow the burnout. Brilliant. Okay. I'm good at serving data, but I'm not good at drawing graphs. So bear with me. What we see when we can mathematically calculate, you might see some spikes like this and then it balances out over time. This is what it will cost to use Nursa today. Okay, and what we find is that by consistently using Nursa, you burn out employees who are part of your team less, and you see a cost savings trajectory in the building that goes something like this. Okay, and then it'll flatten out up here, but this is where everybody wins. And one of my favorite pieces of just poetic wisdom is a poem called The Ambulance Down in the Valley. It's by a man by the name of Joseph Malin. It's worth looking up, and it's kind of fortune cookie wisdom from your grandfather, and I love it. But the basic idea is, if you have a cliff, what's better, to put a fence here or to place an ambulance here? And the poem is about how a community makes decisions. And obviously, a preventative solution of putting a fence on a ledge will frequently trump just picking up dead bodies in the valley, right? People who fall. It's worth reading, but we see the same thing at work in our space, where you can pay tight hourly wages and be the leanest, meanest machine from a facility perspective, and you will constantly have to be dependent on agency because people will turn over because they're not paid well, they're not appreciated the way they think they should. And so costs, yes, up front it's a loss, right? And if this is time, then how this works for a facility over time is that we balance out those costs over time, and eventually we can save them money. And so software is beautiful at this because computers do math faster than we can and in larger sums. And so we build a personalization algorithm for each facility and for each clinician. And for the facilities, we're trying to optimize to get to this moment as quickly as we can. Is this helpful?
Yeah, thank you.
Brilliant.
So having created all this over the past decade, waking up each morning, what was your motivation?
Oh, yeah. Okay. So two anecdotes. This is a great question. After I bought the agency, I did my first, we had a facility that we worked with who went dark. We were doing a lot of volume with them month over month over month, and they stopped picking up the phone. And so I drove to the facility, and it turns out that the entire management team was fired. This is actually pretty common. If you can't get your agency costs, your outside nurse staffing costs in check, you get moved. And I walked into the facility, and we had submitted 6 weeks earlier, we had submitted 2 nurses to fill a travel nurse assignment, a 12-week assignment. And their 100 pages, it was actually like 78 pages and 120 pages, but their profiles were sitting on the front desk inside the front door. This is their passports, like again, all of their personal information laid bare. There's no one monitoring the lobby. And these people's information was just left open on the keyboard. And I picked up both of those profiles. I had my meetings with the company, and I drove home knowing that there was a better way to protect this information and preserve the capability of a nurse's personal life. The second piece of this was right after a second illustration. Right after COVID hit New York, somewhere around the middle to end of March, we started seeing cases in Utah about the early part of April. We had a facility here in Utah who called us one night. They had gotten our name from someone at the state offices as it may be a Hail Mary, a potential way to solve their problems. And the story that they told me was, we have 25 nurses who just tested positive for COVID. We have over 160 patients in the building. If we cannot put a nurse at their bedside tomorrow, we have to close as a company. Can you solve this problem? And the response at that point was, well, yes, like we want to solve this problem. We've never seen a problem this big. So let me go to work. And we went to work that night. We filled 23 of the 25 positions. We kept the building open, and COVID patients were served. Of the 23 nurses that we sent in the building, only 1 tested positive for COVID. So that sort of gets at the magic of what we can do. But beyond that, better than 55% of the needs that we fill will list, match, and fill within 24 hours of the shift start time. Right? If we don't put a clinician at the bedside, nobody does. And in light of that, that means that we have a material impact on patient well-being and care. That means the work that we are doing betters the world. And that, like I can put people on forklifts all day and I would be mesmerized by the efficiency of the machine that we built. But the fact that we are literally impacting the way in which lives are saved. Yeah, man, that's not something to invest in. That's a hard mission to back down from. And that's what's driven the market. There is no better place in the world where healthcare should be top tier than this country. And it is not. It is not. And we have the capacity to change that, not just for us or our kids, but for our children's children. And I love the way in which we can do that.
Alrighty, 2 questions for you. First one, I was looking at your guys' reviews online, and I was just wondering, do you guys pay out weekly, bi-weekly, daily, or monthly?
Right now, we pay out bi-weekly or weekly, and before the end of March, we'll be paying out daily. So this is like the frequency of pay is a subject matter that comes up quite a bit in reviews, as you noticed.
Yes.
And there's a lot of varied responses about that as well, certainly. Go ahead.
I was just wondering, for as far as like future things, are you guys thinking about expanding your licensed like employees to more than just RN, LPN, and like possibly like EMTs, MA? I know I worked in like a couple of pediatric offices and like a dermatology office, and like that would have been like this would have been a really, really awesome resource, but just the certification is not LPN or RN. So what are your plans as far as that?
Yeah, so we have active test beds in every category that you just listed, except dermatology. There's kind of two ways that we can expand this contextually, so the licensure, the types of people that we serve, and then geography. We can go farther and deeper. Our team goals this year are centered around making both of those more of a reality, but not at the cost of perfecting what we're doing with RNs and LPNs. On the front end of your career, you walk into an opportunity, a job, and you want to add something net new. You want to add something to the product, to the team, to the work or the effort that you're a part of. And there's nothing malicious about that. But as you go through maybe a second chapter or a more mature portion of your career, what you start to be able to see is that the journey between 0 and 95% complete and 95% and perfect, they're about the same distance. And someone who has demonstrated experience, who has been around the block a time or two, will start to more often appreciate the value of the power that is born out in the patient pursuit of perfection. And so for us right now, yes, we want to do those things, but we don't want to do them half-cracked, right? Nobody is calling me on a daily basis in anticipation of a crappy solution. And so we want to do them well. And in order to do them well, we have to do what we have now darn near as perfect as we can. And so that's the thinking behind it. But you're certainly starting to see the ways that we could expand in mass.
I came in a little bit late, and while I'm taking the notes, it sounds like you guys are a specialized temp agency, but then you own the facilities. What was your business name again?
No, so Nursa, NURSA.com is the name. There's certainly an opportunity here to segregate and to pinpoint. There are lots of people who build solutions that are tech-enabled solutions, okay? So you can, there's a company in our space, a number of companies in our space who are an agency in their root, and they just use technology as a front door. For us, we are only interested in solving this problem with a product delivery. I do not want to have people involved or intersecting in the transaction, because that results in just a really big adult game of telephone, right? You guys have all played telephone on a playground at some point. You tell some person a secret, they tell some person a secret, and 5 people down the line, you listen to the result. This, if we have people in the middle, what happens is incentives get twisted, motivations get altered, and delivery on the solution isn't as pure. And so we're solving the problem with tech, or we're not going to solve it at all.
I have that issue when I work for Marriott. Actually, every temp agency I worked for, so you guys pretty much make sure that there are nurses or people available for the hospitals.
Yeah, our software. Yeah, our software connects the nurse and the facility directly. We don't intermediate in the middle of that. Go ahead.
I was wondering, so back to the pay, do you guys, so they get paid hourly, what do you guys get for sending out the nurse? How does it work? Do you just get paid a certain percentage of what they get per shift, or do they pay you separate, obviously, right?
Yeah, so what'll happen in the transaction is we will pay the nurse within 7 days of twice a week of the shift being completed and both parties verifying that it happened. And then we bill the facility. And so there's a financial calculation here. It's called a cash flow gap.
Depending on how many hours they work?
Correct.
So you get paid per hour that they work?
Correct.
Oh, nice.
We get a portion of the transaction.
Okay, and do you have a competitor app or?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, there's like 3 that started this week.
Oh, wow.
It's a very, very
So
active
why would they
space right
choose
now.
you?
Brilliant, brilliant. So this is where we get back to doing what we do incredibly well.
Okay,
So we're not a calendaring solution.
Well, you have to be though, I mean, like if you have a traveling nurse, you gotta give them
Yep.
notice,
Yep.
right?
So there are components where you could draw that parallel, but I don't ever want to compete with Google Calendar in building a product.
Okay,
I want to be hyper-focused on
Mhm.
connecting these two parties.
right,
And it's why I'm as particular and specific about that as I am, because you can end up when there's lots of activity in a space, there's lots of money that gets invested into that space. It can start to go to your head and you can start to say, well, we can build a calendar solution and be a marketplace. And those aren't always in synergy, right? You can be at pretty distinct odds with even internal teams. And so we want to do the per diem piece perfectly and then look for other opportunities to expand.
okay,
So that's the difference with your company. You're not attempt to hire. You make sure they have work to do and that facilities have people
Correct.
to do the job. And once they no longer have a job to do, you make sure that the employees can go somewhere where they have work.
Correct. We're matchmaking, right? And we're doing it systematically. And so our ability to dynamically and algorithmically drive those matches between these two parties, one has a need, one wants to facilitate a solution for that need, that's where we win. So today, how we differentiate ourselves is the level of deliverability. So the fact that we can deliver and the consistency of that deliverability.
Sort of like gig work.
Absolutely, absolutely.
My question was like, is it possible to download that app and like if you need a nurse personally for like the person that is not related to an actual like hospital or anything like that, like if you like an old person living at her house needs a nurse, like can she get on that app and get a nurse to do their job?
Today, no, but we're testing. The idea that if we know who a clinician is and the type of work they are capable of, and we knew what that patient's needs were, we should be able to drive a direct connection there. Yes, and I'm certain, I will tell you this, I am certain that is a big portion of how the future of healthcare will work in space. One more? I think, we're at time. I'm sorry, Eric.
One more, yeah.
Great, go ahead. Yeah.
How do you guys deal with compensating cancellations from the facilities end and from the nurses end?
Mathematically is the short answer. And this is a really big piece of what causes us differentiation.
Yes.
Okay, your ability to predict when a cancellation is going to happen by either party and how you handle that, that's the secret sauce. That's the secret.
Okay, but you do offer cancellation compensation?
Absolutely.
Wonderful.
Absolutely. And we have lower cancellation fees for the facility than any agency you'll ever have.
All right.
Thank you, guys. I hope this has been valuable. Appreciate your time.